Hi there. Hope you're all having a great summer solstice or winter if you happen to be in the southern hemisphere. I'm Chris Saxon. I'm part of Stephen Feuerstein's Oracle Developer Advocate team and part of the answer team on AskTOM. So I'm really excited today because we've got another SQL Office Hours session. We've got quite a few questions that have come in advance, and some of them are kind of interesting. So we'll just jump straight into those and get going. So let me just bring my slides up again. If you've got any questions about anything as we go through, just put it in chat and I'll keep an eye on it. And if you've got any other questions, then like I say, just put that in chat. And if you want to talk to me, use your mic, then please say, and I'll unmute you. So let's get going. So we'll start off, and first question came in. So someone was doing some date conversions like this. They had running this to date and returning a date that they completely didn't expect of the 16th of October 03. Now, there's a lot of kind of things going on in this here, so let's just kind of unpick them. So the first up, they're saying, well, we've got this date here in year, month, day format. So 2010, 8 October, August, sorry, 03. But you know, the first thing to notice here, this is just a string. As far as the database is concerned, it doesn't know that that's actually a date. All it knows is that is the literal value 201000, you know, and so on. So that is not a date. So that is the first thing to notice here. It's not converting a date, it's just converting that string. So what it's doing is saying, well, date, 20th, month, 10, and then year. So that's the first problem. Now, if we just kind of think about this in a bit more detail, let's imagine it really was a date that we were actually converting. So we're doing to date on a date. So we do something a bit like this. But when my slide changes, there we go. So what we got is the 3rd of August 2010 as an actual date, and we're doing a to date on it. Now, that sounds good, but there's actually a problem. To date accept a character, not a date. So first thing the database has to do is convert this date that you passed in to a character. And what it does is an implicit conversion. So there's actually a little hidden to char going on here. So, and the problem with this is you haven't defined a format mask, so it's implicit. So the Oracle, the database has to pick up a format mask for this conversion from somewhere, and it does that using the client's NLS date format. So it's very possible that two people accessing the same database on different machines can have different NLS settings. Some people prefer year, month, day format. Other people prefer day, month, year. Americans prefer month, day, year for some reason, and so on. So everyone could have their own setting for this and end up with a different conversion, which is a problem. So this is the kind of something to watch for. If you are passing a date into a to date or a string into what you're actually passing in is a string, not a date. So be aware of that. Next thing is that if we just pop back a second, we'll see that the format mask doesn't match. So we've got no slashes here in our date, in our string, but the database is still actually able to convert these. And that's because Oracle database by default is very forgiving when it comes to format mask conversions. So you can see here, we've got a bunch of dates or strings we're trying to convert to dates, but none of them quite match the actual format. Some of them have slashes rather than hyphens or tildes or stars and so on. All of these will successfully convert this string to a date, which can be a bit surprising. And most of the time, this is actually kind of nice. It's kind of handy, but it can lead to unexpected behavior sometimes. If you need it to exactly match the format mask, so you want these conversions to fail, what you need to do is use the FX modifier for your in your format mask. So you're saying fx hyphens when we've got slashes in the input string, well, they don't match exactly anymore. So you'll get the literal does not match format string error or something similar. So we saw a couple of things. First problem is we weren't actually passing in a date. We were passing in a string. So we got some unexpected conversions. Then there was this issue where the database is quite forgiving with format masks. So we got something we didn't, it was able to convert it even though it looked like maybe it shouldn't. But perhaps the most interesting question is, so we got this string and it's actually the 2010 0803. And we did a to date of that. So what we got is the 20th of October, 803, year 803. And actually the to date returned the 16th of October. This is probably the most confusing aspect of it. And this, to answer this, we need to kind of go back in time a little bit. So back in the 16th century, Pope Gregory noticed something. Well, it wasn't just him that noticed it, but he got a bit annoyed by the fact that the date of Easter was changing. So Easter is something that is calculated from the spring equinox. So it's an offset from something to do when the moon's at a particular, or the sun's at a particular height in the sky. And he was noticing that this was starting to come earlier and earlier and was drifting. The date of Easter was drifting further and further away from the date it was supposed to be according to the equinox. And the reason for this is back in the Roman times when we got the Julian calendar, they calculated the duration of a year as 365 and a quarter days. However, a year is actually ever so slightly less than that. It's like 365.24 and some decimal digits number of days. So over time, we're gradually adding, the difference between the real date or the calendar date and the solar date was gradually drifting over time. And people have been picking up on this for a while, but Pope Gregory decided he was finally had enough of this and wanted to sort it out to bring Easter into line with the solar calendar as it was supposed to be. So when this happened, they did a couple of things. First up, they redefined when leap years happened. So to start with, leap years just happened every 4 years. But to reflect the fact that a year is ever so slightly less than 365 and a quarter days, what they did was say that, okay, well, a leap year is every 4 years, unless that year is divisible by 100. Unless it's divisible by 400, in which case it is a leap year again. So many of you probably remember the year 2000 was a leap year. None of us were alive in 1900, or I don't think, I'm pretty certain no one on the call here is alive in 1900, but that wasn't a leap year. So this changed. So we changed the definition of when leap years happened. But the other thing that happened was in 1582 or something like that, an extra 10 days was added to the calendar, or 10 days were bypassed in the calendar. And so this explains the difference here. The date on the left is in the Gregorian calendar, and Oracle database uses the Gregorian calendar. Date on the right is the Julian date for that. Now, Gregorian dates technically don't exist before Pope Gregory enforced the change. So slightly strange, unexpected things can happen when you've got dates going further back in the past than that. So it is something you need to watch for. It's not something I've ever had to worry about, but if you are dealing with historic data for whatever reason, something to be careful of. So, as I say, there was a whole bunch of interesting things going on with that date. And the key things to remember is that the representation, unless you define a variable or a value as an actual data type, it is only a number or a string. Until you've to-date it or you've assigned it to a date variable, it is only a string or a number, which leads to, or is likely to lead to, all sorts of implicit conversions and unexpected errors. If you have any questions or comments on that, just stick them in the chat. Otherwise, we'll move on to the next question that we had. Okay. So let's move on. And another question that came in. So a person was asking, they had a very basic insert statement. They're saying, well, I'm selecting from a table, it's returning one row and inserting it into another table. And this is taking a really long time. Why is this? Why is my insert taking so long? Now, here's the short answer. I don't know. I don't know why this statement was taking so long. Why? Well, I have no idea what the database is doing. I can't see what it's actually trying to do. There's a whole bunch of variables that could be going on. It's a bit like if I ask you, well, it took me 3 hours to get to work today. Why is that? And it's like, well, there's a lot of information you need to be able to know to answer that, such as, what method of transport I'm using. Did I walk, cycle, drive, get the train? Which route did I take? Was there any accidents or blockages on the way that would have held me up? It's just a question you can't answer. And it's the same when it comes to answering questions about SQL performance. In order for anyone to help you effectively, they really need to understand and see what the query or the statement is actually doing, what it is really running in your database. If you can't, they're just guessing. So that mind, well, how can we find out more information? How can you do some more work what can you do to investigate what the statement is actually doing? And there are many tools and techniques available which we've supplied with Oracle database. So the first of these I mentioned, one of my favorite, is something called the SQL Monitor. So what this does is it tracks the progress of SQL statements in real time. So if you've got we've all had that experience of a SQL statement that's running for, minutes, maybe even a few hours, and you're just like, what the heck is going on? Why is this taking so long? So what you can do is go to the SQL Monitor, and it will update and track the progress through the execution plan as it goes along. So if we take a look, you can access this in a number of ways. It's available in Enterprise Manager if you use that. If you use SQL Developer, you'll see this lovely screen we've got up here. And this will just kind of cycle and update every few seconds. If you're feeling particularly up to it, you can write your own scripts to extract the information out. There's a package which will return it in various formats, and various other tools have ways of investigating and interrogating it. But the key thing is you get the execution plan, you can see what steps it is doing, and you can see we've got these little timelines, so you can see when each particular part is active. So you know how long it's taking, you can see where the bottleneck or the slow part of your SQL statement is. So this is a fantastic tool. I really like it, but it does have a few limitations. First thing to be aware of, the licensing effect of it, you need to have the diagnostics and tuning pack to use the SQL Monitor. If you don't have these, then you're not licensed to use that. So very important to be aware of that. Next thing is, this only actually tracks long-running statements. So by default, the statement has to take more than about 5 seconds before it will actually be captured and start appearing in the SQL Monitor reports. So a lot of times that's really useful, but for a lot of web applications, a SQL statement that takes 2 seconds or 3 seconds can be far too long. So you need to kind of optimize it and figure out how you can make it run quicker. But it will not appear in the SQL Monitor report by default. So this can be particularly a problem if you've got a process that runs, let's say, 7 or 8 SQL statements, all of which take 1 to 2 seconds each. None of those will appear in the SQL Monitor report, but overall the process is taking, 10, 15, 20 seconds, something like that. So you don't see it, which can be a problem. So if you've got lots of small questions, then lots of small statements, it can take a long time. And now you can force it. There is a hint available, so you can force it to trace a particular query if you want to, but there is some overhead in doing that. So do be aware of that. Don't want to enable it on everything just by default. So let's just notice there's a question come in from chat from Dennis. Let me have a look. Follow-up question about dates and timestamps. There are two ways to write get all the records for the last day using timestamps. Okay. Select star from table where create timestamp is greater than current timestamp minus interval day, and select star from table where create timestamp is greater than current timestamp minus num to day, second interval, blah blah. What are the differences between them under the hood? Is one preferable to the other, and which should we avoid maybe in the subprogram's code? So Dennis, is your question basically about whether you use the interval syntax or the number to day second interval syntax for doing data arithmetic? To be honest, I'm not aware of any particular difference between them. Obviously, one of the can be overriding factors is what format you get your input in. So sometimes you just get a number. So maybe that's what the client's passed you, or maybe that's what's stored in a table. And in that case, using the num to ds interval or ym interval can be the way to go, because you can then just pass it in as the variable to that, whereas it's not quite so straightforward with an interval, particularly if you're talking about, let's say, it's a day, but actually it's got fractional time in it as well. So like 1.5 or something, or 1.367, what does that convert to? Yeah, and so it's you just saying the second one, you can use a bind variable. So let's say it comes down to what format your input's in. If you know that your interval, if you're just typing the query yourself, it's kind of personal preference. I think interval is clearer what you're trying to do, because you're saying, interval 1 day or interval 10 seconds or whatever it is. But if you're having to receive the input and have need to use bind variables, which generally you should be doing, then ds interval is often the way to go. But I'm not aware of any other particular reasons to use one over the other, unless anyone else has any other comments they want to add on that. So okay. Interesting comment from Judith. So SQL Monitor, is SQL Monitor available in 18C XE? So yes, that's a good question. So I don't know if many of you saw the announcement of what was included in 18C XE, which is coming later this year. But 18C XE is now Enterprise Edition, essentially, with pretty much all the options. There's a few things excluded, like rack, but it is a limited version of Enterprise Edition in many ways. So you're limited to two CPUs, 2 gig of RAM, and 12 gig of disk. But other than that, you've got pretty much all the toys to play with. So of course, that means you've got the diagnostics and tuning packs, which means you've got the SQL Monitor. So we're really excited about this. We think this is a fantastic way, if you want to play around at home, or, you've got some development instances or things you want to prototype and get going, you can just download XE 18C XE when it's available, and get up and running and just do what you want. So we think this is a great feature, and so yes, SQL Monitor will be available. You will be able to use SQL Monitor with that. Any other questions on dates, timestamps, or SQL Monitor before we move on? Give you a moment to think while I have a drink. No, okay. So they say just if you do have questions, put it in chat, but I'll start to move on. So as I said, SQL Monitor is great, but it does have a few limitations, in particularly if you want to capture details about quick running SQL. So now the thing about SQL statements that run pretty quickly is you can just execute them yourself. You know, SQL Monitor is great for those ones which are going to take minutes or hours, and you don't have the patience, or you're just, you know, not willing to wait several hours for it to finish. With something that takes 2 seconds, it's quite easy to run it yourself and then capture the stats for it using something called autotrace. And what this will do is get you the execution plan and a lot of the kind of details we saw on the previous slide for the SQL Monitor, but you can then, you'll get them for that statement as soon as it finishes running. The key thing with autotrace is it has to complete the SQL statement. So it's good for short running statements, but ones that are going to take minutes, hours, not so useful. So there are a few ways you can do it. The way I like best is in SQL Developer. So up on the top left, there's this funny little icon that we've got. You can also hit F6 by default, and when you execute the statement, you'll get the full plan like this, and you get all sorts of information, such as, you know, how much work each statement did, the elapsed time, how many rows it processed, and so on. And one of the reasons I love the SQL Developer method for this is you can expand and collapse all the different parts of the plan yourself. Really handy if, oh, excuse me, you've got one of those massive SQL statements which has just got like a huge execution plan with, you know, 60, 70 steps in it. Makes it much easier to kind of play around with it and see which bits are actually slow. So that's useful if you just got one short running statement. But what if you've got a whole stack of statements? You're tracing a process and it's got 10 queries in it, or a few queries, some inserts, a couple of updates, whatever. They're all execute quickly, you know, within a second or two. But overall, they add up to a process that takes several seconds, you know, 10, 20, 30 seconds, which is just way too long if it's like a part of a transactional system for someone to sit there and wait. You know, people get really frustrated if it takes more than a couple of seconds. I know if like I'm typing and hit enter and have to wait, I'm already starting to itch waiting for it to finish. If you've got a, you know, this is your business users, you know, an internal application, and they're having to wait a couple of seconds, they're entering orders all day, every day, get really frustrating really quickly. So in this situation, you need to capture information about a whole bunch of SQL statements. And the best way to do that is to trace a session. And this will capture information about every statement, what it does, gets its execution plan, and then you can review it. And one of the ways you can do it, so there's this DBMS monitor package, which has session trace enable. So you can pass in your session and serial number. The true flags are to do with whether or not you capture wait and bind information. You can exclude those if you want, but personally, you know, I think if you're trying to trace something to figure out why it's slow, you pretty much always want those. So I normally always set those to true. If you do not, you can pass SID null for SID and serial number. That will trace your current session. And what that does is, as the SQL is executing, it will write a file to the database server. And that will contain all the details about what it did, what it was waiting on, and so on. When you either finish tracing or the process is finished and the session disconnects, you can get that file and analyze it to see what was actually going on. There's a command line tool called tk-prof, which does that, or there's also various other tools that you can use to analyze it. You can just load the file itself into SQL Developer. That helps you navigate it as well if you want. So various ways to look at that. So if you want to know more about these techniques that I've just talked about, I've got a blog post where I've explained how to kind of capture this explain plan or execution plan information, should I say. And I kind of go through each of these. I also talk about DBMS XPlan, another technique I haven't really covered just now. So if you want to know the details about what I've just been talking about, get the scripts and so on, head to that blog post. That will show you the information. So if you've got Anyone got any more questions on comments on that? Okay, so these techniques are all well and good, but of course, it's easy for me to sit here and say, I don't know what's going on. Someone's always going to go, yeah, but why is it slow? Come on, Chris, what's your guess? I've just sat on the fence here and said, I have no idea. Well, I do want to take a guess as why this particular statement was slow. Okay. So the question came in: can anything be done to have DBMS XPlan working again in Live SQL? So good question. We are looking into it. We're looking into it. Basically, we do know it's an issue, and we're seeing what we can do. Unfortunately, the information you need to get out of DBMS XPlan has to access a lot of $V views, which kind of restricted, and we don't want to allow people to be able to see. So we hope to have a solution, but we will, we want it to. So hopefully, but I'm not sure exactly when that will be. Okay, so why was this insert statement slow? So I do have a hunch about why it might have been slow in this case. So the person asking the question mentioned that there was a unique constraint on the table they were inserting into. So when you're inserting just one or two rows and it's taking a long time, now it could be that the SQL statement's slow. Unlikely if it's if it's returning one row and a fairly simple query. Could be again that you're waiting on the disk access is really slow. Maybe you're waiting on log writer or something like that. But again, if it's just one row and everything else is running okay, that's kind of unlikely too. The thing that might be the case here is that it's blocked by an uncommitted session, an uncommitted transaction in another session. So as I was saying, there's a unique constraint on that. So let's say we've got primary key on the table and I insert the value 1, and then I, for whatever reason, forget to commit that session. Then you come along and also try and insert the value 1. Well, now we've got a conflict, haven't we? Primary, typically, a primary key means that you can only have each set of values appear once. So we've got two sessions trying to insert the same value, so there's a conflict. And what we do in Oracle databases says, well, whoever goes first has priority. So you've got to wait for that session to either commit or roll back, at which point the second session can then validate against that unique constraint or primary key and go, that value 1 already exists, and throw the ORA1, unique constraint violation error. Or if they roll back, go ahead and process. So this is my guess. My best guess is probably what's going on in this situation. But it's worth checking. Good way to help spot this is in $session, there is a column called blocking session, and that will tell you if you're waiting on someone else, which session it is you are waiting on. Very useful to be able to see. And Dennis, I see Dennis saying you seem to be a true Oracle. I'm not sure about that, Dennis. I'm not sure this is the answer. Maybe the person who asked the question was asking is on and can confirm or not, but we'll see. So if you are blocked, have a look in $session. And something we had someone else come in ask, well, how do you see blocked in sessions in Oracle database? So this is one way. There are actually quite a few dictionary views you can look at to see whether or not you've got any blocked sessions and who they're blocked on and why and so on. So another set of views that I like to use are the DBA locks views. So we got the general locks views, which kind of shows everything, and then the DML and the DDL specific ones. So if you're blocked on an insert, two people are trying to insert the same primary key value, that will appear in DML locks. If you have an uncommitted transaction then your information will still appear there. You'll show that you've got that lock, but you won't be blocking anyone. As soon as you are blocking someone, you'll be able to see who you're blocking and why. DDL locks, if you're changing a table or something that is holding locks, you'll see that information there. So check those out, see what's going on if you want to see about locks in your database. So anyone got any other more comments or questions on those, the performance issues we discussed or blocking before we move on? Okay, well, I'm keeping an eye on the chat, so let's move on a bit and bring up a next question someone asked. So it's to do with Listagg. They had the lovely 1489 error when they were trying to generate a string with Listagg. So Listagg, great function to help you build comma separated strings or whatever separator you want to use. But as this error shows, when you hit the character limit, it kind of blows up and you get an exception. So up to before 12.1, the maximum length this could be was 4,000 because it returns a varchar 2. The maximum length of varchar 2 in 11.2 and before was 4,000 bytes. In 12.1, you could increase this up to 32K, but you had to set the max string size equal to extended. Not sure how many people have actually done that. I think most are with the default, which is 4,000 characters. So it can be kind of easy to hit this limit and get the exception. Yes. Just comment from Duty. Yes, you could also query VDL active session history to see the waiting event during the insert run. Yep, that's another good place to look. If you've got the diagnostics and tuning license, Ash is a good way to see kind of blocking information too. So good, just suggestion there, Duty. So let's return to Listagg. We're saying, so we've got this problem. You've got a string that's too long. How do we avoid it? Now, the person who sent the query was actually being quite clever and had a subquery, and they're checking the length, see if that was under 4,000, but they were still hitting the problem. So I wasn't able to reproduce this issue as they showed it. So if you were the person who asked about Listagg and you're on the call, please send us more details because I couldn't actually reproduce the problem as you showed it. So there must be something a bit different about what we're trying to do. What I will do is discuss some other techniques and some other ways around this problem. So the first is something we introduced in 12.2, and that is a new clause to handle overflow semantics with Listagg. So when you blow out that 4,000 byte limit, and you do that with this new on overflow clause. So we've got on overflow truncate. What that means is now, if the length of the string Listagg is going to construct is going to be more than 4,000 characters, instead of an exception, what you'll get is an output that looks a little bit like this. So imagine we got some dots there. Imagine that we got a big long string of text all the way off the left side of the screen, and it's coming up and we're just below the 4,000 character byte limit. So now we've got some dots. That's telling us that there was some extra information which we've had to remove, and the number in brackets 42 means that we stripped out 42 characters. So that was the extra information which is now missing. So you got some idea that, okay, maybe we were only just over the limit, we were 2 or 3 characters over, or maybe we were like 10,000 characters over. So you got an idea of the fact that you hit this limit and just by how much. So how does this clause work? Well, let's look in a bit more detail. So as I said, there's the on overflow clause now, and this can be truncate or error. So error is the behavior you have now, and that is still the default in 12.2. You have to explicitly say you want truncation rather than the error behavior. Unless there's a really good overriding reason, we keep backwards compatibility in Oracle database. So what do you want to do if you have truncated it? Well, as we saw, by default, you can get those dots, but you can also supply your own text. So you could say something like more, or maybe click here, or, see further details, whatever. Here, depending on what you want to show to the client and how you want to represent the fact that there is extra information there. So you can supply your own custom text to indicate there's more information, and then whether or not you want to include the count in your results or not. So handy little feature, which will stop your query blowing up. So that's all well and good, but potentially there's still a problem. So let's say the string's actually like 5,000 or 6,000 characters long, so it's really long. We're going to be stripping a lot off the end of this, but you still want to see that information, right? You still want to have maybe split it over separate rows. So one row having the first 3,900 odd characters, the next row having the remaining characters, and so on. So it'd be useful to actually do that. So, how? Well, there's actually some techniques that you can use to do this. And the person asking this was on 12.1. So luckily, they can use a fantastic feature which we introduced in 12.1 called match recognize, or pattern matching. So this gives a lovely SQL statement that looks a bit like this. So a bit scary to look at when you first see it. So what I'll do is just kind of walk slowly through this. Now, match recognize is a fantastic feature, but does take a little bit of getting your head round. So don't worry if you don't understand all of this today. I'll give you details about some more resources you can use to learn about this. So the first thing I'll do is kind of start at the bottom here with this define clause. So we're saying what it is we're trying to look for. And we said we want the maximum length of the string should be 4,000 characters or bytes. So what we need to do is sum up all the rows, keep concatenating the strings together until we hit 4,000 bytes. And when you have sum in your define clause like this, that's exactly what it's doing. It's getting the cumulative total. So it keeps joining everything together, or if it's numbers, getting the running total so far. Well, this is the running total of the lengths. So you can see when we got this, if this exceeds 4,000, then we've hit our limit. So we're saying we need this to be less than or equal to 4,000 bytes long. When it is, we want to stop and start a new group. So first row we match, we say, okay, well, what's the length of that? So this is our length here, length strt comments. Assuming that's less than 4,000 characters, probably is if it's in a varchar, then we're okay, and then we can start adding in the comments on the end here. So we're looking for a pattern here where we've got one row which is less than 4,000. We need to keep adding more and more rows onto the end of it until the total length of the string we've got exceeds 4,000 characters. And we do that with this pattern clause. So we're saying start off with any row. So we get to the first row in our data set, check that, and that marks the start of our group. Then there could be any number of rows after that until we hit our limit. So it could be that this first string is really long. Maybe it's 3,000 plus characters long, and the next one is also 3,000 plus characters long. So we might only have one row in our set there. Or it could be that there's a whole stack of like 1 character long strings. You don't know. Or in the general case, we don't know. So what we're doing is we're saying, well, there could be 0 instances, or there could be any number of instances of this cumulative length of string. And notice we've got the star here. So what this is a regular expression. So these patterns can be really powerful, and it really comes down to how good you are at regular expressions. As always, there's one thing that always catches developers out, it's regular expressions. So if you want to start playing with this, make sure you understand how they work and spend some time playing with those. So that's our pattern. We're having at least one row and then any number of others until we've reached 4,000 characters. excuse me. Next, we've got this all rows per match. So we need to define this. By default, match recognize will just give you one row for every row in the group. So it's kind of a bit like group by. If you're trying to group all the customers, if you group by customer ID, for example, your orders, you'll get one row per customer. By default, match recognize does one row per match. So if we've got a lot of bunch of short strings before we hit our 4,000 character limit, then instead of seeing all those rows, you'll just get one row at the end, which is not necessarily what we want. We want to see all the information as well. Next, we want to assign a group to those. So we can do that with the match number. So this is a new function for match recognize. Starts with 1. So first row has match number, group number 1, and then all the rows into the total length of the string we found so far is 4,000 characters. Also have the group 1. As soon as we go past 4,000 characters, the next row is group 2, and so on. And then we need to define in which order we're processing the rows. So as I'm sure, or I hope you're all aware, if you want to guarantee the output of a SQL query, the rows appear in a particular sequence, you have to use an order by. Same thing with match recognize. To guarantee deterministic behavior and you always process data in the same sequence, you've got to have an order by. So you have that's got the order by clause here. Now, technically, this is optional in the sense that you can run your query and it won't throw an exception. However, I strongly urge you to consider it mandatory because, as I said, you can get non-deterministic behavior. And in many cases, the results will be incorrect and it can be tricky to spot that. So we got the order by clause. So put that all together and we can get our output a bit like this. So in here, I've said the limit is, much less than 4,000 characters, 20 or whatever the number comes to here. But you can imagine if these characters kept going out the screen, they would be in groups of up to 4,000 bytes long. So that was a very quick overview and introduction to match recognize. This is a fantastic feature. I think it's the best thing to happen to SQL this century. So I thoroughly recommend that you check it out and spend some time learning it. If you want some more resources, there is in Live SQL, there's a whole stack of scripts. So most of these were created by Keith Laker. He's the PM for match recognize. There's a few other scripts in there as well. These are in the tutorial style, so they kind of walk you through and explain how these features work. Thoroughly recommend you check these out. Also, if you want to go in a bit more depth, learn about it, he's also written a book, The Complete Guide to SQL Matching. Notice it is volume 1. There's a second volume coming at some point. Just show that there is a lot to this feature, but even just getting to grips with the basics, you can do some really cool stuff with it. So thoroughly recommend you check these out. And his blog down here at the bottom, he also goes into a lot more detail. Returning to the Listagg approach, if you want to see how this worked, a bit more discussion, a bit more detail about how the solution I worked through just now works, or look at some of the other solutions you want that are available, particularly if you're not on 12c yet, then take a look at that blog post there. Okay, so we've got a question that's come in. Okay, follow-up question on Listagg. What about the reverse operation? What is the best official way to unlistagg a comma-separated string? I'm aware of DBMS utility comma to table, but it works properly only with strings which could be Oracle identifiers. I know about regex in-string workaround combined with connect by level, but it looks like ad hoc. And there's apex string split, which I really liked. Okay, and yeah. Are there plans to adopt such a function to the base edition, or maybe I'm missing something? So first answer, Dennis, I think this is a good kind of summary of the options that are available, or at least the ones that I'm aware of. One, the connect by level trick is the one that I tend to use the most. One thing that could be a problem for that in the past was if you had many rows, let's say you've got lots and lots of data and each row has its own comma separated string within it. The connect by level trick tended to fall apart a bit there because you end up exploding out your result set. There is a technique around that now, which came in 12C using lateral. So lateral enables you to have an inline view and use columns from tables outside the inline view. So if you had select star from table and then join that to select something from a subquery, you had to have the join outside it. You can now do a join inside lateral. Okay, and so check that out. That can be quite useful. You're just saying, yeah, Stu Ashton has recently posted some excellent articles about parsing using JSON functions. Yeah, there are some techniques using the XML and JSON functions as well. I'm trying to remember, there's like an XML serialize option or something like that as too. So the short answer, there isn't really a kind of inbuilt option to do this currently. I'm not aware of specific plans to do that. And which is best kind of depends on your use case, personal preference, what you're doing. They all have some different performance considerations as well. So, there isn't a fixed answer here. Would say if you would like to see this, if you're not already familiar, there is the Community Ideas Forum over on the Oracle Dev community, which allows you to submit suggestions. And if they're popular, they get voted up by the community. We'll review them and then see if we can work those into our releases. So if this is something you want to see in Oracle database, and it's something that pops up quite frequently, so I imagine there probably would be some support for this. Submit it there and see how it goes. But does anyone have any other approaches or solutions to the Listagg that they'd like to share? Is there a suggestion about Boolean data type in the SQL there? I think you might find, yes, there is one. If you take a look at the suggestions, that is one of the more popular ones. Okay, so hang on. There's a question that came in. Is there anything built into Listagg like match recognize to first distinct the values before Listagg sorts and makes the delimited output? Okay, that's a good question. So currently, no, there isn't a distinct Listagg option. We know there's a lot of support in the community for this. So stay tuned is what I'll say, but we do know that this is something a lot of people have been calling for, and that the workarounds for it are quite clunky. So keep your eyes open and what's coming in the future releases. As I say, if you're not aware yet, we've now got annual releases with Oracle Database. So we've got 18C this year, coming out on premises very soon, the next few weeks. Next year we'll have 19C, year after that 20C. So you will be getting features more rapidly. So hopefully some of these smaller features, which can make a big difference to you, will be able to work their way in a bit more easily. Okay. All right then. Any other questions or comments on Listagg before I move on? Okay, so let's move on to So someone had a question about running a case statement. So this is just kind of a cut down version of a much bigger SQL statement. The actual query was way too big to show on the screen right here. So what I've done is simplified. So we've got case expression. Now here C1 isn't a real column in a table. What it is an expression. So how to write what's the best way to write the case expression using that? So what I mean here is we got something a bit like this. C1 is calculating a percentage or something like that. And the person asked, they wanted to know, how can we use this in a case expression? Or what's the best way to write this? Now, what's the best way to write this? So now you can just kind of dump this straight into, what's just happened to my, okay, something weird's just happened there. I'm not, sorry about that. I'm not sure what's going on. So let me just bring slides back up again. I don't know, I must have hit something strange there. Dennis, so in what release of the database is going to be Boolean data type, SQL data type? I can't make any comments or promises on that, Dennis. One thing I will say is it may seem like it's an easy feature, but when you think about it, there's a lot you need to consider. So if you add a new data type, you're talking about not just adding it to the table itself, you've also got to look at all your constraints. They've got to be able to support it. The optimizer has to know what it means and how to calculate values, distribution, distinct values on it. All the downstream products are also affected by it, things like Data Guard and Golden Gate and so on. Tools like SQL Developer need to understand and use it. So people go, why can't you just have this really simple thing, this Boolean data type? Actually, adding a new data type has a huge ripple effects throughout the whole ecosystem of the database. So it's not as straightforward as it might first seem. This is one of the reasons why those of you who are familiar with the JSON functionality introduced in 12c, we stuck with just using varchar, clob, and blob rather than coming up with a JSON type data type like we did with XML, because then that way everything kind of just works. All the other downstream products and so on. Yeah, so I think that's why JSON database was different. So yeah, I'm sure you understand, but I think Dennis, but I'm not sure everyone does. Okay, so let me just bring my slides back up. Okay, and if I can share my screen again. Hang on, where's my share screen option gone? There we go. There we go. So we have an expression a bit like this. So to recap, what we're trying to do is have a case expression which capture this information. Now, one thing you can do is just repeat the expression twice in your, well, potentially n times in your case expression, because you might have multiple of these when clauses. Of course, that kind of breaks a key programming principle of don't repeat yourself. If you want to change the definition of what this is, you've got to recode it in many places. And this is one of those things that's really easy to catch you out and you're likely to make a mistake. What it's better to do is have a inline view or a with clause or something like that, define it in there, and then do the case expression in your outer select. That way, if you need to redefine what how this expression is, what the formula is, you're only doing it in one place. So that was kind of the questions that came in advance. I can see there's a question coming in about historical locking errors. What can you, when you say errors, are you mean deadlocks or just people holding locks? What exactly? You mean deadlocks? So if a deadlock happens, the database will detect that, and a trace file will be written to the database server. That will give information about which sessions are involved and what they were doing. So every time you have a deadlock and its database detects it, you'll get a trace file. So you need to look in the trace directory for that. Okay, I think we're coming up to the hour, so we've got a few minutes if anyone has any other questions or comments on what we've discussed so far, want to add more information on that. I'll give you a couple of minutes to type away. You know, you can, I can talk faster than you can type, I'm sure. Okay, what about distributed transaction? The view DBA 2P seek pending, and there's some information about the transaction, but this transaction is over a database link, I assuming you're going to say, or something like that, or over multiple. To be honest, distributed transactions is not something I've really played with and don't know a huge amount about. If you know, anyone on the call can help with that, please share. Okay, Petrus, reverse Listagg using pipeline function. Can you give us a bit more detail about what you're asking there? Are you saying are you trying to implement a reverse Listagg that way, or yeah, if you could give us a bit more background on what you're asking or trying to do there, Petrus. Ooh, okay, big jump, load of code there. Okay, so this is something you built yourself as a way to delist ag. Is that what you're saying? Or list unag? Is that? Yes. Okay. Well, thanks for sharing. That's good. Yes, that is another neat approach. All right, cool. Yes, thanks for sharing that. Okay, Judith. When it comes to locks, maybe a useful enhancement would be to add a wait, no wait clause to the DML statements. I guess. What do other people think? Does anyone else think that having a wait, no wait for, you mean like on insert, update, and delete? Would other people like to see a wait, no wait on those statements? I think I think the point is, if you try and run an update that is, so as Dennis says, insert an update already lock the row. I think the point is, if someone else has run an update before you, you're both trying to update the same row, rather than being blocked waiting for them, have a select, do a no wait. Now, but of course, you could do this by having a select for update first to lock the row. That's a good point. Okay. The errors were hibernate errors around locking and permissions causing record not available. Okay. I think we'll need some more information to help with what you're trying to do there, Flamudi. If you can collect the information together, kind of details about the errors you're actually getting, SQL statements that are running, and post that to regular AskTOM, or post it as a question for a future office hour session, then we can look at that in a bit more detail. But then we can look in that more information in more detail. But as I say, we're coming up to the hour. I really hope you all enjoyed this. More importantly, I hope you learned something. It's a lovely summer's day here in the UK. I'm not far from Stonehenge, where there was a whole bunch of druids or would-be druids celebrating summer solstice. So I hope you, if you're in the northern hemisphere, are enjoying the longest day, and in the southern hemisphere, enjoy the shortest day. Thanks for joining me, and I hope to see you all next time. Right, bye-bye.